The crown never chooses the richest woman in the room. It chooses the one who refuses to kneel. I didn't belong inside the Blackstone Manor ballroom. Every polished marble floor, every crystal chandelier, every perfectly tailored tuxedo reminded me that I was only a waitress carrying silver trays through a world that wasn't built for people like me. My name is Emma, 26 years old, working double shifts just to keep my tiny apartment above a neighborhood bakery in Brooklyn. Rent was due in 4 days. My tips barely covered groceries. The only expensive thing I owned was my mother's wedding ring, tucked safely into my apron pocket because I couldn't risk losing it. That night, Manhattan's wealthiest guests gathered beneath ceilings, painted with gold leaf, while a string quartet drifted through the room like a quiet promise. My job was simple. Smile. Refill glasses. Stay invisible. Invisible people never attracted trouble. At least, that's what I believed until I noticed everyone subtly changing their posture at the exact same moment. Conversations softened. Laughter faded. Even the billionaire standing beside the grand staircase stopped speaking halfway through his sentence. I turned with my serving tray and saw him enter. Vincent walked through the ballroom without hurrying, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit that seemed almost weightless against his broad shoulders. Black ink tattoos disappeared beneath his collar before reappearing along the back of his hands whenever he adjusted his cufflinks. His dark hair was combed neatly backward, revealing calm eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Nobody announced him. Nobody needed to. Power introduced itself long before words ever could. I lowered my eyes and continued toward a table near the windows, determined not to become part of whatever invisible current had just swept through the room. Then I heard an elderly guest coughing. Hard. His champagne glass slipped from trembling fingers and shattered across the marble. People stepped backward instead of forward, terrified of embarrassing themselves more than helping another human being. Without thinking, I placed my tray on a nearby table, knelt beside the gentleman, offered him water, and loosened his tie enough for him to breathe comfortably again. Easy, I whispered. Slow breaths. You're okay. His breathing steadied after several seconds. Relief spread across his face before embarrassment replaced it. I smiled as though nothing unusual had happened. Happens to everybody, I told him quietly. Let's get you somewhere comfortable. When I stood, I realized the ballroom had become strangely silent again. Vincent was watching me from across the room. Not with curiosity. Not with amusement. It felt more unsettling than that, as if he had recognized something nobody else had noticed. I quickly picked up my tray and returned to work, pretending his attention meant nothing. A few minutes later, the event manager stormed toward me, her voice sharp enough to slice through the orchestra. Emma, what were you thinking? She hissed. You abandoned service during the most important gala of the year. Someone needed help, I answered calmly. Medical staff was already coming. Your responsibility is the guest's experience, not becoming part of it. Before I could respond, another voice entered the conversation. Deep. Even. Impossible to ignore. Then perhaps, Vincent said, stepping beside us with effortless composure, the experience improved because she remembered your guests were people before they were clients. The manager's face drained of color. She apologized so quickly that the words nearly collided with one another before disappearing into the crowd. Vincent never looked at her again. His attention remained entirely on me. What's your name? He asked. Emma. Do you always ignore the rules? I met his eyes despite every instinct warning me not to. Only the ones that ask me to ignore someone who needs help. For the first time, the corner of his mouth lifted almost imperceptibly. It wasn't quite a smile. It was something rarer. Respect. He nodded once before walking away without another word. Yet nothing inside that ballroom felt the same after he left. Guests who had overlooked me all evening suddenly greeted me by name. Security guards opened doors before I reached them. Even the event manager spoke to me with nervous politeness. I didn't understand what Vincent had changed. I only knew that somewhere beyond the glittering chandeliers, a decision had already been made, and I had the uneasy feeling my ordinary life had quietly ended long before anyone bothered to tell me. The next morning, I convinced myself the strange feeling would disappear with daylight. Powerful men notice thousands of people every year. They forgot them just as quickly. By 7 o'clock, I was tying my brown hair into its usual neat bun behind the diner counter in Midtown, pouring coffee for construction workers, office assistants, and exhausted nurses finishing overnight shifts. The smell of fresh pancakes and sizzling bacon replaced crystal chandeliers and polished marble. This was my world. Honest. Loud. Predictable. Around 10 o'clock, a black luxury sedan stopped across the street. Then another. Neither customer came inside. They simply remained parked where they could see every window. I tried ignoring them until my manager, Linda, quietly leaned beside me. "Emma, do you know those men?" she whispered. I looked through the glass. 2 men in dark suits stood outside as if they belonged there. Calm. Patient. Watching everything except their phones. "No," I answered truthfully. "Should I?" Before Linda could reply, the front door opened. Neither guard entered first. Vincent stepped inside alone, still dressed with quiet precision, his black suit immaculate despite the rainy morning. Conversations gradually faded until the only sound left was coffee dripping into glass pots. I carried my order pad toward his table because nobody else seemed willing to move. "Good morning," I said. "What can I get for you?" "Coffee," he answered. "Black." I poured it without rushing. "Anything to eat?" "Not today." He thanked me with a slight nod, surprising me more than his appearance. Men with that kind of reputation were supposed to command rooms. Vincent simply occupied one. I turned to help another customer before hearing a raised voice near the register. A wealthy businessman complained loudly because his breakfast order had taken longer than expected. When he noticed Vincent sitting quietly nearby, his irritation instantly shifted toward me. "People like her never understand professionalism," he muttered with enough volume for everyone to hear. I felt my cheeks warm but kept my voice steady. "Your meal will be ready in less than 2 minutes, sir." Vincent placed his coffee cup onto the table with remarkable gentleness. The tiny sound echoed through the diner. "She has handled every customer with respect," he said evenly. "Perhaps you should consider doing the same." The businessman forced an awkward laugh that nobody joined. He paid his bill, collected his order, and left without another word. Silence lingered after the door closed. I walked back to Vincent's table, folding my arms. "You cannot keep doing that." He looked up. "Doing what?" "Stepping into conversations that are not yours." It became mine when someone confused kindness with weakness. I sighed. "You solved one problem and created 5 more. Everyone here is staring." His expression remained calm. "They were already staring yesterday." I could not argue with that. After a long moment, he reached inside his jacket. My heart tightened until he placed nothing more dangerous than a simple ivory business card on the table. No title. No company logo. Only his name and a phone number. "You are free to throw it away," he said. "Then why give it to me?" "Because eventually someone will force a decision you should never have to face alone." I slid the card back toward him. "I do not owe you anything because you defended me." He looked at the card but did not pick it up. "I know." "Then why does this feel like the beginning of something I never agreed to?" For the first time since entering the diner, Vincent allowed a faint breath that almost resembled a quiet laugh. "Because every important change begins before either person believes it is real." He stood, left enough cash to cover the untouched coffee and every breakfast served that morning, then walked out without waiting for gratitude. Through the front window, I watched both black sedans pull away behind him, disappearing into the flow of Manhattan traffic. Only after the lunch rush ended did Linda quietly place the ivory business card into my hand. I stared at it in confusion. "He never took it back," she said softly. "I think he meant for you to keep it, whether you wanted to or not." I slipped the ivory card into the small pocket of my apron because throwing it away somehow felt more dramatic than keeping it, and I refused to let a single conversation rearrange my life. 3 days passed without another glimpse of Vincent. I worked breakfast shifts, covered an extra evening shift for a coworker with the flu, and almost convinced myself that everything had returned to normal. Then people I had never met suddenly began recognizing me. A flower delivery arrived with no message attached. I refused it. A customer quietly paid for every table in my section before leaving without introducing himself. Another woman, dressed in an elegant navy coat, simply smiled at me and said, "You are braver than the stories suggested," before disappearing into the afternoon crowd. Stories. That single word settled heavily in my chest. I asked Linda if she knew what people were talking about. She hesitated before locking the cash register for the night. "Emma, there have been rumors all week," she admitted. "Customers keep saying the most influential man in the city personally defended a waitress. Some think you are related to him. Others think you saved his life. Nobody knows the truth." "There is no truth," I answered. "I helped an elderly man. He stopped someone from insulting me. That is all." Linda looked unconvinced. "Sometimes that is enough for other people to invent the rest." I walked home beneath the glow of streetlights, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling that my ordinary life was slowly becoming public property. The bakery below my apartment had already closed for the night. As I reached the entrance, I noticed an elderly neighbor struggling to carry 2 heavy grocery bags up the front steps. I hurried over and lifted one before she could protest. "You always help everyone," she said with a tired smile. "One day somebody will finally help you." I laughed softly. "I am doing just fine." Yet, even as I spoke, I wondered whether that was still true. The following afternoon, the diner became unusually busy after a nearby office building hosted a corporate conference. Every booth was occupied. Orders piled up faster than we could serve them. I was balancing 3 plates when the front door opened again. This time Vincent was not alone. Several men in tailored suits remained outside while he entered carrying nothing except the quiet confidence that always seemed to arrive before him. He chose the same booth as before. I finished serving another table before walking over with my order pad. "Coffee?" I asked. "If that is still allowed," he replied. "Coffee is always allowed." I poured the fresh brew while pretending the entire diner was not secretly watching us. Before I could leave, a little girl no older than 8 wandered away from her family and stopped beside Vincent's table. She looked at the tattoos on his hands with complete curiosity instead of fear. "Did those hurt?" she asked. Her mother hurried over, clearly embarrassed. "I am so sorry." Vincent simply answered the child. "Only for a little while." She nodded thoughtfully. "They look like they tell stories." He looked at the ink across his knuckles before saying quietly, "Some stories remind us who we used to be." The little girl smiled, satisfied with the answer, and skipped back to her parents. I had expected the room to relax. Instead, it grew even quieter. I realized everyone had witnessed something impossible. The man whose name traveled through whispered conversations had spoken more gently to a curious child than most people managed with their own friends. As I placed the coffee pot back onto my tray, I finally understood why the rumors refused to disappear. They were not spreading because Vincent had noticed me. They were spreading because, somehow, whenever he stood near me, the version of him the world believed it knew no longer seemed entirely true. For the first time in weeks, I stopped wondering why Vincent kept appearing wherever my ordinary life unfolded and started asking myself a different question. Why was everyone else changing because of it? The answer arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Linda called me into her office before my shift even began. She folded her hands across the tiny wooden desk, looking more nervous than I had ever seen her. "Emma, someone offered to buy this diner." I blinked. People buy restaurants every day. Not like this. They offered twice the market value, but only if every employee keeps their job. I felt a quiet chill settle over me. "Did they say who made the offer?" She slowly shook her head. "No. They only said it was from someone who admired the way this place treated honest people." Neither of us said Vincent's name, yet it lingered between us anyway. I spent the next 4 hours trying to forget the conversation, but every customer seemed determined to remind me that my life no longer belonged entirely to me. Some smiled too politely. Others whispered after I walked away. One man even thanked me for bringing kindness back to powerful people, as though I had somehow accepted a responsibility I never asked for. Near closing time, the familiar black sedan stopped outside again. Vincent entered without his security detail following him inside. He waited until I finished serving another table before speaking. Would you take a walk? He asked. Only for 10 minutes, I answered. I still have work. We stepped onto the sidewalk where cool rain left the streets shining beneath the city lights. Traffic drifted past in a steady rhythm. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, I stopped beside a newspaper stand and faced him. Did you try to buy the diner? His expression remained calm. Yes. Why? Because good people should not lose places worth protecting. I crossed my arms. You cannot solve every problem by spending money. I was not solving a problem. Then what were you doing? He looked directly at me. Removing one that might exist tomorrow. I exhaled slowly, searching for the right words. Vincent, you keep changing my world without asking whether I want it changed. He accepted the criticism without arguing. That is fair. People stare at me everywhere I go. I know. Rumors follow me home. I know. Customers treat me differently. My neighbors ask questions. Even my manager cannot look at me the same way anymore. For the first time, I saw something flicker behind the composure he carried so effortlessly. Regret, perhaps. Not for what he had done, but for what it had cost me. I underestimated the consequences, he admitted quietly. Then stop. The word came out firmer than I expected. Please stop deciding what is best for me. I have spent my whole life making difficult choices with very little. They are still my choices. Rain collected on the shoulders of his black suit, yet he never moved. You believe I am trying to control your life. Are you not? He remained silent long enough for passing traffic to fill the space between us. When he finally answered, his voice was softer than before. No. I am trying to make sure nobody else can. I looked at him for several seconds, wanting to believe the sincerity behind those words, but sincerity did not erase consequences. Protection that arrives without permission can feel exactly like control, I said. He lowered his eyes briefly before giving a single respectful nod. Then I will remember that. Without another attempt to persuade me, Vincent stepped back toward the waiting sedan. He left exactly as quietly as he had arrived, and for the first time since we met, I realized something important. I had finally told the most powerful man I had ever known the one word almost nobody dared to say to him. No. And instead of becoming angry, he had listened. The city felt different after I told Vincent no. Not safer. Not more dangerous. Just uncertain, as though every familiar street had quietly shifted while I was sleeping. He kept his promise. Days passed without another black sedan waiting outside the diner. No unexpected gifts arrived. No strangers greeted me with mysterious smiles. The silence should have brought relief, yet it only made me realize how much tension had been hiding beneath every ordinary moment. One afternoon, Linda called everyone together before opening for lunch. She looked exhausted, holding a stack of invoices against her chest. Business has changed, she admitted. Some regular customers have stopped coming. Others only come to stare. Reporters have called twice asking about Emma. We cannot keep becoming part of someone else's story. Every pair of eyes slowly turned toward me. Nobody blamed me aloud, but disappointment has a way of filling a room without needing words. My throat tightened. If this is hurting the diner, I can leave. Linda immediately shook her head. That is not what I want. But the hesitation before she answered hurt more than the sentence itself. For the first time since I started working there, I no longer knew whether I belonged. I finished my shift in silence. As I stepped outside carrying my backpack, I noticed a folded envelope resting beneath the windshield wiper of my aging sedan. There was no name, no signature, only a single sentence typed across plain white paper. Stay away from people whose shadows are larger than your future. I read it twice before quietly folding it again. There were no threats, no demands, just enough uncertainty to settle heavily inside my chest. That evening I did something I had promised myself I would never do. I took the ivory business card from my kitchen drawer and stared at Vincent's phone number for nearly 10 minutes before finally calling. He answered after the first ring. Emma. He recognized my voice immediately. How did you know it was me? Because you would only call when something truly mattered. I closed my eyes. Someone left a message on my car. I read the sentence aloud. The silence that followed felt longer than it really was. "Where are you now?" he asked calmly. "At home." "Stay there." "I am coming." "No." The word escaped before I could stop it. "You promised to listen." Another pause. "You are right," he said quietly. "Then listen to me now. I do not want more cars outside my apartment. I do not want more people noticing me. I just want my life back." His next sentence was almost a whisper. "Emma, I cannot give you back the life you had before we met." The honesty in those words stung because I knew he believed them. "Then maybe we should stop pretending this can ever become normal." I heard him breathe slowly on the other end of the line. "Is that what you want?" I looked around my tiny apartment, at the unpaid bills on the counter, at my mother's ring resting beside the sink, and suddenly realized I did not know the answer anymore. I only knew that everyone around me was paying a price for decisions they never made. "I think we should stop seeing each other," I said softly. The line remained quiet for several seconds. When Vincent finally spoke again, his voice carried no anger, only unmistakable disappointment. "If staying away from me is the only way you believe you can protect the people you love, I will respect your decision." After the call ended, I sat alone in the dark without turning on a single light. I had expected relief. Instead, it felt as though I had closed the only door that still led toward someone who had never once lied to me, and somehow losing that fragile connection hurt far more than I was prepared to admit. 3 mornings later, I learned that silence could become its own kind of punishment. Vincent honored every word I had asked of him. No calls. No unexpected appearances. No quiet gestures that made impossible days feel slightly easier. The rumors faded just enough for customers to return to the diner, and Linda smiled again when she counted the receipts after closing. Everyone around me seemed relieved. I should have been relieved too. Instead, I caught myself looking through the front window every time a dark sedan drove past, only to feel strangely disappointed when it continued down the block. One rainy evening, an older gentleman entered just before closing. His silver hair was damp from the weather, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades making difficult decisions. He ordered a bowl of soup and a cup of black coffee. As I placed the check beside him, he looked up with thoughtful eyes. "You are Emma." It was not a question. I hesitated before answering. "Yes." He smiled kindly. "My name is Anthony. I have worked with Vincent for more than 20 years. Every instinct told me to end the conversation, yet something in his voice carried no pressure, only sincerity. "He sent you?" I asked. Anthony slowly shook his head. "No. He would not disrespect your decision." That answer surprised me more than anything else. He stirred his coffee before continuing. "Do you know what he canceled this week?" Canceled. 3 negotiations that would have expanded his influence across the East Coast. Meetings he prepared for over 2 years. I frowned. Why would he do that? Anthony looked out the rain-covered window before answering. "Because every conversation eventually returned to you." Every recommendation from his advisors was the same. Remove the distraction. Distance yourself. Protect your reputation. Vincent refused every one of them. My hands tightened around the empty coffee pot. I never asked him to choose anything. "We know." Anthony's expression remained gentle. "That is precisely why everyone noticed." I sat across from him after my shift ended, no longer thinking like a waitress speaking with a customer, but like someone searching for a truth she had been too stubborn to see. I believed he was trying to control my life. Anthony nodded without judgment. "And from where you stood, that belief made perfect sense." Was I wrong? He took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "Vincent has spent his entire adult life solving every problem by moving first and explaining later. It protected many people. It also left him alone because nobody ever told him when he was mistaken." I looked down at my folded hands. "I told him no." "Yes," Anthony said quietly. "And do you know what happened after that?" I slowly shook my head. He listened. The simple truth settled deeper than I expected. I remembered the rain on his shoulders, the regret in his eyes, the way he walked away instead of forcing another conversation. Suddenly I realized something I had completely overlooked. Vincent had not changed after meeting me because he became weaker. He had changed because, for the first time, someone he genuinely respected valued freedom more than protection, and instead of demanding obedience, he chose to carry the disappointment himself. Anthony stood, leaving enough cash to cover his meal. Before walking toward the door, he paused beside my table. "Power convinces people they can own the future," he said softly. "Real love teaches them they never could." After he disappeared into the rain, I remained alone inside the quiet diner long after every chair had been placed upside down on the tables. For days I had believed I lost Vincent because I wanted my ordinary life back. That night I finally faced the painful possibility that I had also lost the only person willing to become less powerful simply because I asked him to. Anthony's words refused to leave me alone. I heard them while pouring coffee. I heard them while walking home beneath the glow of traffic lights. I even heard them in the quiet moments before falling asleep. Real love teaches them they never could. I had spent weeks believing Vincent was trying to possess my future. Now I wondered whether he had only been trying to stand beside it without knowing how. The following Friday, the diner closed early because a water pipe burst in the kitchen. Linda apologized as everyone packed up before sunset. "Go enjoy the evening," she said with a tired smile. "Tomorrow will be busy enough." Instead of taking the subway home, I wandered through Midtown with no destination in mind. The city felt strangely peaceful after the rain, sidewalks reflecting thousands of white and amber lights like scattered pieces of another world. As I crossed a small public plaza, I noticed a familiar figure sitting alone on a stone bench beneath a row of maple trees. Vincent. There were no black sedans nearby. No security waiting a respectful distance away. Just one man in a black tailored suit staring at the fountain in complete silence. For several seconds, I considered turning around. Then he looked up. Surprise crossed his face before composure quietly returned. "Emma." Anthony visited the diner. Vincent lowered his eyes for a brief moment. I did not ask him to. I know. I walked closer until only a few feet separated us. Neither of us hurried to fill the silence. The fountain continued its gentle rhythm while people passed without recognizing either of us. Finally, I spoke. "Why did you never tell me what you gave up?" He answered without hesitation. "Because sacrifices lose their meaning when they become arguments." I sat beside him on the bench. "I thought staying away from you would fix everything. Has it?" I looked across the water instead of at him. The rumors became quieter. "And you?" I smiled sadly. "Not quieter." He nodded as though he had expected that answer. "Emma, I accepted your decision because respecting your freedom mattered more than convincing you to stay." His words carried no bitterness, only quiet truth. That somehow made them even harder to hear. "I owe you an apology," I admitted. "No." He turned toward me with remarkable calm. "You owed yourself honesty. You gave me that." I shook my head. "I judged your intentions before I understood them." "You judged my actions," he corrected gently. "My actions gave you every reason to." We sat together as evening settled over the city. For the first time since we met, neither of us felt like strangers standing on opposite sides of impossible worlds. Then Vincent's phone vibrated once. He glanced at the screen before locking it without reading further. "You are not going to answer?" I asked. "It can wait." "What if it is important?" A faint smile appeared. "Right now this conversation is more important." The answer warmed me more than I expected, yet it also revealed something unsettling. A man who had always placed responsibility above everything else was quietly changing the order of his priorities. "Vincent," I said carefully, "I never wanted you to abandon your responsibilities because of me." His expression became thoughtful. "And I never wanted my responsibilities to become the reason you disappeared from my life." The words settled between us with undeniable weight. We had finally reached the truth neither of us had been willing to admit. This was no longer about protection, rumors, or misunderstandings. It was about two people trying so hard not to hurt each other that they had almost succeeded in walking away from something neither of them truly wanted to lose. As the fountain lights reflected across the water, I realized our relationship had changed forever. We could not return to who we had been before. The only question left was whether we were brave enough to become who we might still be together. After that evening in the plaza, nothing returned to the way it had been, but for the first time I stopped wishing it would. Vincent never appeared unexpectedly again. Instead, he called once every few days, always asking the same simple question before anything else. "Do you have time to talk?" It sounded almost ordinary, yet I knew how extraordinary that question was for someone who had spent his life giving orders instead of asking permission. We met in quiet places that belonged to neither of our worlds. A small bookstore with old wooden shelves. A neighborhood coffee shop where nobody recognized him. A public garden where children chased pigeons across the sidewalks. Every conversation felt less like building a romance and more like rebuilding trust, one honest sentence at a time. Then one afternoon he invited me to lunch at a historic hotel overlooking Central Park. I almost refused out of habit before realizing I no longer wanted fear to make every decision for me. The dining room was elegant without feeling intimidating. Sunlight poured through tall windows, softening the polished wood and white tablecloths. Vincent arrived before I did, standing as I approached the table. "Thank you for coming," he said. I smiled. "You are getting better at invitations." A quiet warmth crossed his face. "I have an excellent teacher." We spoke for nearly an hour about ordinary things. My childhood. His favorite books. My dream of one day opening a neighborhood cafe where nobody felt unwelcome. He listened more than he spoke, asking thoughtful questions instead of steering the conversation toward himself. Halfway through dessert, several well-dressed men entered the dining room. Their expressions changed the instant they noticed Vincent sitting across from me. They approached respectfully and stopped beside our table. "Sir," the oldest among them said, "the board has gathered." "They are waiting." Vincent looked up calmly. "Then they can continue waiting." The man hesitated. "The decision concerns the future leadership structure." I could feel the tension without anyone raising a voice. Years of habit seemed to pull everyone in one direction, while Vincent quietly remained where he was. "Please give us a few more minutes," he replied. The men exchanged uncertain glances before leaving without another word. I stared at him after they disappeared. "They expected you to leave immediately." "Yes." "Why did you stay?" He folded his hands together for a moment, choosing each word carefully. "Because I spent too many years believing that every important decision had to begin with power. You helped me understand that some should begin with people instead." I lowered my eyes, suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of everything that had changed between us. "Vincent, I never wanted to become more important than your responsibilities." "You are not replacing them," he answered gently. "You are reminding me why they exist." Before I could respond, he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. My heart briefly remembered the ivory business card from weeks before, but this time he placed something entirely different on the table. It was not jewelry. Not a contract. Not a symbol of ownership. It was a small brass key attached to a worn leather keychain. "What is this?" I asked softly. "The front door to a community center my mother helped build many years ago. It has been closed for a long time." He looked directly into my eyes. "You once told me that protection without permission feels like control." I never forgot those words. "So I am not asking you to stand behind my world. I am asking whether you would help me build something that belongs to neither of us alone." I wrapped my fingers around the old key, feeling the smooth edges worn by years of use. In that quiet dining room, I finally understood that Vincent was no longer offering me a place inside his empire. He was offering to create a future where power no longer sat above kindness, and for the first time since our paths crossed, saying yes no longer felt like surrender. It felt like choosing the same direction together. I kept the old brass key in my apron pocket every day after that lunch, right beside my mother's wedding ring. One reminded me where I came from. The other reminded me where I was choosing to go. Several weeks later, the community center opened its doors again, not with photographers or grand speeches, but with neighborhood families carrying homemade cookies, children laughing in freshly painted hallways, and volunteers arranging donated books across wooden shelves. I left the diner after my morning shift and spent every free hour helping organize classrooms, serving coffee, and greeting people who simply wanted a place where they felt seen. Vincent came whenever his schedule allowed, never announcing himself, never asking anyone to recognize who he was. He stacked chairs, carried boxes, repaired broken shelves, and quietly disappeared whenever someone thanked him too enthusiastically. Watching him become part of something that expected nothing from him changed me more than I ever expected. One Saturday afternoon, Anthony arrived with several familiar faces from Vincent's world. They wore tailored suits, but instead of discussing business, they spent the afternoon assembling playground equipment behind the building. I noticed how naturally they followed Vincent's example without a single order being spoken. Leadership, I realized, had become quieter. Before leaving, Anthony walked beside me across the playground. "They understand now," he said with a gentle smile. "Understand what?" "That strength does not disappear when kindness enters the room." A few days later, Vincent invited me to dinner at Blackstone Manor for the first time since we met. The mansion looked just as magnificent as I remembered, yet it no longer felt intimidating. The enormous room seemed warmer, filled with soft music instead of silent expectations. During the meal, several respected members of his organization joined us. I recognized the hesitation in their expressions. They were not studying my clothes or wondering whether I belonged. They were waiting to see what Vincent would choose to say. He stood, holding nothing except a simple crystal glass filled with sparkling water. For many years, he began calmly, "I believed loyalty meant protecting what I built. I was wrong. Loyalty begins by protecting the people who remind us why we build anything at all." The room remained perfectly still. Then he looked directly at me. "Emma never asked for influence. She never asked for wealth. She only asked to be treated as someone free to choose her own life. That is exactly why she has earned my deepest respect." No applause followed. None was needed. One by one, the people around the table stood in quiet acknowledgement. There was no ceremony, no crown, no dramatic declaration. Only something far more meaningful. Acceptance freely given instead of demanded. On our way outside, I slipped my hand into Vincent's. "Do you know what is different now?" I asked. He smiled softly. "Tell me." "The first time we met, everyone changed because they were afraid of your power." I looked back through the glowing windows where conversations had already resumed with surprising ease. "Tonight they changed because they understood your heart." He remained silent for a moment before answering. "That happened because you refused to let me become the easiest version of myself." We walked through the garden beneath a sky filled with quiet stars, neither of us speaking again until we reached the front gate. Months earlier, I had believed crowns belonged to people who demanded loyalty. Standing beside Vincent, I finally understood they belonged to those willing to carry responsibility without taking away another person's freedom. My ordinary life had not disappeared. It had simply grown large enough to make room for someone who had learned that the greatest measure of authority was never how many people stood beneath you, but how many could stand beside you without ever being asked to kneel.